Okay, so we started the recording. We come in the camera a little bit. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our campaign debate. Today we have Saad Khan, Micheal Bancroft, and my brother Basil. So my two friends, Saad Khan and Micheal Bancroft, are all seniors at Loyola Chicago, and they have different life experiences and public policy preferences. On the one hand, Mr. Khan is a progressive who believes in generous public spending that will yield ambitious social programs such as Medicare for all. He's also an advocate for universal basic income and wants a generous second stimulus package in the age of COVID-19. Mr. Khan wanted Bernie Sanders or Andrew Yang in the Democratic primaries, but has settled for Joe Biden in the national contest. By contrast, Mr. Bancroft believes in the power of the free market and is skeptical of big government intervention in the economy. For instance, Michael Bancroft appreciates private health insurance because it keeps the health sector competitive. He advocates for low taxes and has voiced his opposition to parts of Biden's economic plans, which would raise the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. He's also not in favor of raising taxes on those who make more than $400,000 a year. His favorite media outlet is the Wall Street Journal, and he's skeptical of mainstream cable news and big tech companies such as Twitter and Facebook. Mr. Bancroft also worries about cancel culture and some of the violent protests this summer. Despite this, Bancroft has voiced his opposition to some of President Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and his divisive nature in general. Mr. Bancroft was undecided for most of the presidential contest, but voted on Tuesday, October 20th. In the future, Bancroft has expressed his desire for a bipartisan candidate that will suppress political polarization and work across the political aisle. And, our third participant couldn't come today, but my brother Basil is largely apolitical. He is swinging for Biden, but says the vaccine's the only thing that matters, and it could be Trump or Biden. I won't care that much, which is odd. So anyway, the fact that I will interview my friends and my brother, unfortunately, because our third friend couldn't be here, in a highly polarized time shows that we can overcome societal divisions through the medium of civil discourse. I predict that we will have a civil and substantive debate and that will engage our viewers. We will discuss matters of public policy, political campaigns, and media in great detail. And we hope that we can find common ground and show that the future does not have to be so polarized. So I'm going to give the question to Basil first because he has a big meeting to get to, and he's going to have to leave us, and then I'll give the floor to Micheal and Saad. So the question I would like to ask Basil is, as of October 21st, 2020, the Economist election forecast model gives Biden a 93% chance of winning the Electoral College. The 538 election model gives Biden an 87% chance of winning the Electoral College. Do you find these polling aggregates accurate, and do you trust polls in general? Please answer briefly. Give 1 minute, 2 minutes.
All right, sure. So I think from what I've been reading is that a lot of the polls are saying that Biden's most likely to win based on a number of factors. I generally trust polls by reputable sources. Like, I think The Economist is one of those sources where they have a history of being consistent news reporters and in a way that they're centrist and not in any way trying to, I guess, trick or trying to manipulate the readers, thinking they're just kind of clearly reporting facts. So anything that comes out of The Economist, I generally trust, and I haven't had any reason to not trust what they're saying. I generally trust, if it's by a reputable source, I generally trust it in that, like, I think polls, if you take a sample that's reliable enough, can generally generalize to larger subsets of the population. Of course, like if something comes out and say that they're just polling undergrad students or graduate students at a specific university, obviously that's a poll I probably wouldn't trust. But in this case, I think I do. So I think it's a pretty general consensus that it's probably going to be Biden that wins this election. For example, I think there were polls coming out early or late 2016 about how Hillary was going to win, and they gave her a 30% chance of being losing to Trump. In this case, it's like 7 or it depends on the poll, like 7 or 4% that Trump is going to win. So I think that those odds are a lot more stacked against Trump. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on that question.
Thank you for your answer, and I'll give you one more and you can head out.
Yeah,
Has
sure.
social media nourished a new post-truth politics? How should social media platforms deal with misinformation on the pandemic and the election?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, in that I think it's very easy to blame people for thinking certain things after they read it on social media, but people just generally aren't on guard or skeptical about everything they read online all the time, and it's very hard to keep that standard for your average information consumer online. So I don't know exactly if it's something that we can blame individuals for not fact checking every single thing they read on Twitter or Facebook. It's more the responsibility of these companies that should be coming up with smarter or clever ways to kind of catch things that are obviously can be considered not truthful. I mean, there's some debate about certain things where there might actually be a debate about whether this is true or not true, but there are some things where it's just factual, in that these things should obviously not be propagated on social media. Solutions to that could look like holding these companies accountable with some kind of big fee that they have to pay. I know that they, Google gets sued a lot and Facebook gets sued a lot, but it seems like a lot of these lawsuits just end up spending a lot of time in court and not really making much of a difference, or maybe they actually just end up paying it and it's just a few cents to them in the large grand scheme of things. So I'm not exactly sure what the best solution to this is. Just having them monitored, the content monitored on these platforms, using some kind of algorithm could possibly work. But then again, it's susceptible to the biases of the people that are actually programming these algorithms and what they want people to see and what they don't want people to see. So yeah, it's kind of a tricky issue that I don't really have a great answer to.
Thank you for your detailed answer, and thank you for your contributions, and good luck at your meeting.
All right, sounds good.
All right.
Yeah, nice meeting you guys.
Yeah, man.
Have a good one.
All right, gentlemen. Let's start with question one. And close the door on the way out. And don't tell mom to come in.
Yeah.
Yeah, just in case. What is the most important campaign issue for this campaign, for this cycle? Is it the economy, COVID-19, race relations, or something else? Which candidate do you think will deliver the most on your public policy preferences and why? Lastly, what political ads have you seen that have sold you the most on that given candidate? We will start off with Mr. Micheal Bancroft and we will go to Saad Khan after. Let's make the answer about 2 minutes.
So I think the biggest issue is a toss-up between the economy and COVID. COVID, for obvious reasons. I think that the Trump administration has done a just terrible job in handling it, and we're lucky that it's such a low fatality virus, because I mean, if this was a virus that had the lethality of a smallpox or something like that, I mean, we could, the world could be on the verge of collapse right now with the way we've handled it. But in terms of the economy, I do think that potentially going forward, his platform may be a little bit more in favor of my personal views. I think that their willingness to stay open is going to be a lot more beneficial than a imminent Biden lockdown if he were to win. And then I also am skeptical of Biden's 7% increase in the corporate tax rate, because I mean, once that goes into effect, I mean, you're going to see an immediate drop in all economic activity and output, because that's 7% of all corporations, just bottom line right out the door into taxes, which is going to be quite controversial and quite hard to make up in the overall revenue for, I think, majority of the economy affected by it.
Thank you, Micheal, for your answer. Saad?
For me, the biggest issue is COVID-19. I feel like COVID-19 affects every other issue, such as race relations and the economy. I'm actually in favor of the lockdowns as long as it keeps the virus contained, but I do agree that it might be too excessive for small corporations. They might not be able to, small businesses might not be able to handle the lockdowns. So because of that, I'm in favor of a president that's more willing to provide stimulus packages as well as care grants. Because of that, I feel like Joe Biden handles or Joe Biden aligns more with my views. I feel like I was very disappointed when Trump announced that he wasn't going to continue stimulus discussions until if he becomes president. I feel like that's just blackmail at that point. And when thousands of Americans, millions of Americans are suffering. In terms of your other question about advertisements, I try not to look at advertisements too much. I use ad blocker on my computer and I don't watch that much television. So I just go based off of debates, based social media announcements that both presidents use, as well as my.
Thank you, Mr. Saad. Gallup polling has found that only 41% of Americans trust mass media. Do you believe that the media is fair to President Trump? Where do you get your news? Is Trump a unique threat to democratic institutions like some people say? Let's keep this at 1 to 2 minutes. We could start off with Mr. Micheal.
So I think that the mainstream media is definitely biased. I think it's much more leaning towards the left than it is right or central. And I think a main reason for this is the last I've read, I think it was about roughly 80% of all reporters and journalists were leaning on the left side towards Democratic. And so I think that definitely has a big effect. I mean, you can see it on stations like CNN. And then I think at the same time, though, it's not all on the Democratic side. You have Fox News, which, as many people know, is a lot more further on the right. And I think this leads to a lot of conflicting views that are reported on, a mass scale on a globalized audience. So it's going to create a lot of tension. And because of that, I for the most part, stopped watching any news on the TV, and I'll try and read more through articles that I can, fact check, look who wrote it, and kind of do a little bit more further looking into. So I like looking at the Wall Street Journal, like you said. The Economist is pretty good. And I really enjoy Real Clear Markets and Politics. They do a good job of trying to stay as central as possible and kind of in holding more facts versus, party views or politics.
Thank you, Mr. Micheal. Mr. Saad?
I do agree that the mainstream media is definitely biased. However, it's Trump is just so crazy, like on social media, that I think it's hard to not call him out on what he does. So I think that also needs to be cleared. Just recently, Trump was on 60 Minutes, which I believe is like a news program that stays fairly unbiased. But even then, when they asked him and they told him beforehand that they were going to ask him tough questions, he got so offended he walked out. So I think Trump tries to villainize the mainstream media too much when he needs to realize that he is the president. So he is going to be asked tough questions and he will be criticized openly. And I think Trump's personality is just so extreme. It just clashes with the mainstream media and it just provokes news reporters. But I do agree that the news reporters need to realize that not everything is the breaking story. I think last week or 2 weeks ago, Melania Trump, there was a leaked video of hers saying she hates Christmas or something. And it was just on the news 24/7, but who cares? They need to prioritize what they talk about, and they need to spend time making fun of him and spend more airtime criticizing him.
Thank you, Mr. Saad, for your answer. My next question is, in my view, Trump ran a much more effective campaign in 2016, where he attacked Hillary Clinton's corruption and promised an America First campaign. His message was tailored to his base and undecided voters in the Rust Belt, which is all he really needed to win the Electoral College. This time around, however, Trump has resorted to ignoring public health advice and has resorted to a law and order message instead. He's now focused on an unreliable Hunter Biden story, which was discredited by the Wall Street Journal, and it was kind of an underwhelming October surprise. Has Trump lost his political instincts? Let's have 1 minute on this one. Mr. Micheal, you could start us off.
So yeah, I definitely think that his campaign this time around is really weak. And I think the same goes for Biden's side. I think they both, it's almost a sad feeling seeing that this is what our country chose as the best to offer for each party, because they really kind of bully each other. I think Biden's mental state is definitely a big worry for me, because if he is on the fringe and they're kind of keeping on the down low, I don't see Kamala being somebody who I would want to be rooting for running this country. But at the same time, I think Trump is very extreme and just, kind of like a bully with a lot of what he does on social media and in general, and his blatant disrespect of how critical this virus is in terms of our country's economy and health, though, is just horrible. So I think that, yes, his campaign is definitely not as great as it was in 2016. And I think it's mainly just because of his ego and just his lack of care for the virus. And then I think there needs to be, like you said earlier in the intro, a hopefully going forward in the future, a platform that's much more central, that's willing to take both sides and kind of come to a middle ground and bring people together. Because I think right now both parties are separating this country just immeasurably.
Thank you, Mr. Bancroft. Mr. Saad?
I think Trump's campaign this year, or this term, has been pretty awful. I do agree that his in 2016 it was much stronger. I think with COVID and the Black Lives Matter surges, I feel like it's just impossible for him to really have the strength he did have back in 2016. There's just like everything stacked against him at this point. In terms of Biden, I am disappointed that he is the Democratic nominee, but I do think that he does have the advantage of not being Trump, so at least he has that going for him. And I feel like just the president who is willing to acknowledge the dangerousness of COVID-19 and is willing to assure Americans that he does have a plan for them. I think that's just automatically that makes you a stronger candidate. I mean, Trump openly admitted to lying about how dangerous COVID-19 was. So I feel like at that point, he already lost the Americans' trust.
Thank you, Mr. Saad. Before the pandemic, President Trump had some economic achievements. According to The Economist, in 2019, the U.S. had the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years and enjoyed a fast annual wage growth of almost 5% among the lowest paid workers. Trump has claimed that his strategy of tax cuts, deregulation, and confrontational trade policy are to thank for this. However, economists such as Paul Krugman argue that the Trump tax cuts only increased the budget deficit and failed to yield the promised surge in business investment. Research has also shown that President Trump's tariff war with China has destroyed more manufacturing jobs than created. President Trump argues that Biden presided under a slow economic recovery and would be weak on China. On the other hand, Moody's Analytics and Goldman Sachs give Biden's economic proposals high marks. More progressive folks fault Biden for not going far enough on his economic plans. For instance, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders want to increase GDP spending from 16% to 23% of GDP. But Biden's formal proposals only amount to just a 3% increase. Who do you think has more solid economic plans, and why? Mr. Bancroft, start us off. You kind of already answered this, but yeah,
I saw a good brief. I definitely lead more towards a free, open market with less regulations. But to kind of change up this answer just for this question, I find China to be a very, very real threat to our country right now, both in a national security sense and just in a products measurement. But I do think that there are a lot better ways to go about it than a trade war. So I think that definitely was a mistake on the Trump administration's part. I think they could have found much better ways to keep China in line and kind of, fight back and keep them from bullying us. So I do think that going forward, there are a lot better ways to deal with China, but I'm really undecided as to who would handle the threat of China better in terms of Trump versus Biden.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. Saad?
Well, looking at the domestic economy, I am in favor of Biden's taxes on people who make $400,000 or more. His increasement on taxes. I think that money, if his administration has transparency, if we could see that increase in taxes and where it goes into, hopefully it goes into more social programs. I also think Biden's economic strategy is more student friendly. That we're currently in the largest national debt crisis in human history or in American history. Trump has, I feel like, zero plan for this, whereas Biden, he's willing to make public colleges free for people who make whose families make less than $105,000, and he's willing to cancel that student debt for anyone who went to an undergraduate institution that was public, who also makes less than $125,000. So as neither of these affect me since I'm graduating and I went to a private school, I think even him willing to do this will clear the debt for millions of Americans, and this will ease economic burdens for them. And I think that'll just increase economic prosperity. Millions of new millennials and upcoming Gen Z people, they'll be able to take risks in buying homes, improving the real estate market, as well as being able to take jobs they wouldn't otherwise be willing to take due to debt sacrifices.
Thank you, Mr. Saad, for your answer. This is kind of the wrap-up question, and then I'm going to open the floor up for a bit for a little more debate. As we see, and as some of you have mentioned, we now have a fragmented body politic in the U.S. It seems like our ability to have civilized political discourse has decayed. Some blame President Trump for this, others blame the other party for this. How do we return back to a civilized, civilized political discourse? Let's start off with Mr. Micheal, and then we'll go to Saad.
That's a pretty challenging question. I think that current blame right now definitely needs to be pointed at President Trump and his administration, but at the same time, I think the media and the way they cover certain topics definitely incites even more separation. So I think going forward, if we could find a way to kind of cut down this barrier, get major news medias and even social media and their reporting on things to be more focused on facts and trying to present things in a way that shows it rather neutral, I think that would definitely help. But I think it really just comes down to which president wins, and the certain mannerisms in which they handle problems definitely is probably the number one way to get things to kind of settle back down and come together.
Thank you, Mr. Bancroft. Mr. Khan?
I think with Trump presidency, I think the divide America has already is just going to be furthered. I know Biden isn't anyone's or most people's preferred Democratic candidate, but at the very least, he's like a quote unquote safe choice. I feel like Trump's problem, or one of his many problems, is that he's too divisive. He purposely makes himself in a position where it's us versus them. It's us versus them in the media. It's us versus him like in everything he does. So he just instantly creates a divide. I think he doesn't have any plan for unifying America. He had really no issues on how to solve, or he had no ideas on how to solve any race relations in the past 4 years. He was hiding in the bunker during the Black Lives Matter protests. So I think we need a president, not just with Biden, but going forward, who's willing to help use these divisions, and as well as be willing to tell white supremacists not just to stand back and stand by, but just to disavow them altogether.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. And I'd like to thank both of you gentlemen for the civilized and substance debate. And as divided as things look right now, I feel like this is a good sign of what's to come in the future. That after Tuesday, we can all come together and talk about the biggest issues pressing our society. I'd like to open up the floor to you two, if you guys have any questions of me or of each other. Does anyone have any questions? Nothing?
Well, what are your stances on the election so far? Do you feel like the polls are accurate, or?
Yeah, I think the polls are accurate this time, because like City Economist poll gave Miss Clinton a 70% chance of winning and Trump a 3 out of 10. Now, if you guys are playing poker, a 3 out of 10 chance is still pretty darn good. But this time they're giving Mr. Trump a 4% chance of winning. So yeah, I really don't see a scenario where Trump wins. I'll bet money on it. I'll bet you guys a parm that Biden will be our next president. And then there's talk about the Supreme Court with Amy Coney Barrett swinging it. I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't find it plausible. Now, it could be a Bush v. Gore situation, but Biden's going to win so much states that it's not going to go to the Supreme Court. Trump's going to go out packing his bags, I personally think. And I think Biden, I wasn't very excited of him as a candidate, but he's pushing a message of unity, and I like that. And I'd actually like to push this to you, gentlemen, is what do you guys think should be the future of the conservative movement? Should we go back to the Mitt Romney style conservatism? Should we continue with the Trump style conservatism? How do we really sell the case for conservatism if you're on that side? What do you guys think?
I think right now the only way to sell that platform would be to try and capture the silent majority, because right now there's just so much social change going on.
Yeah.
I think, and it's growing. I mean, I think people are really starting to join it and support it. But at the same time, I think the only way they would really be able to do it would be to target, the middle class, kind of support them, say, hey, we have your back, we're here for you. But at the same time, if they were willing to open up certain aspects of the conservative platform to incorporate these social changes, I think that's the ultimate way of capturing a larger audience.
Yeah, I agree. And what I find very interesting is that I've been reading articles about the Latino votes going to Trump because they want lower taxes and deregulation and so on and so forth. So there is actually a big population of what people would say are people of color that conservatives can capture, I think, post-Trump. Because Mr. Trump often alienates some of these groups. So it seems like a slam dunk, and demographics in the U.S. are changing. I think conservatives can win that group, but I don't see why they're not. So I think that'd be interesting. So thank you, boys, for the civilized debate, and thanks a lot. Any other questions? Okay, thanks. Let's press on.